welcome everybody. I'm Stan Stahl. I'm the founder and president of Secure the Village, and I want to welcome all of you to a very special program we've got today, talking about the implications for personal privacy associated with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What's interesting as we look at this, it's less about Roe v. Wade. In fact, it's almost nothing about Roe v. Wade in particular, but it is a lot about what's our privacy look like and how do we properly secure it? And that's where Secure the Village comes into play. We work helping ordinary people like all of you on this call to help protect your privacy, protect your security, do those kinds of things. And just to kind of give you an indication of what Secure the Village is all about, I want to play a little video for you.
Cybersecurity isn't simple. So if you think you're about to watch a cute video with bouncy music that tells you how what you thought was hard is actually easy, and what you thought was complicated is actually just like 1, 2, 3, rest assured, this isn't it. Because cybersecurity isn't simple, and what we do weaves together law, technology, risk management, governance, public policy, education, political philosophy, psychology, and even questions of freedom and of war and peace. Cybersecurity isn't simple, but the values that motivate us are. The value that says we should treat others' information as we would like our information to be treated. That cybersecurity is an urgent civic duty for the 21st century citizen. And the value that says none of us is as smart as all of us. And that's why we're getting everyone involved, building bridges between those who dedicate their lives to cybersecurity and helping everyday citizens complete that last mile, transforming our neighbors into powerful cyber guardians. Cybersecurity isn't simple, but the values that motivate us are. And our values say that there's a seat at the table for anyone with something to contribute to the global exchange of knowledge we're building at Secure the Village. Because from the boardroom to the living room, it takes a village to secure the village.
As I say, thanks everybody for joining us on this webinar today. I want to now introduce our moderator, a wonderful friend and colleague, Alexa McCulloch. Is on the Leadership Council of Secure the Village. She's co-chair with the Los Angeles chapter of the Harvard Women in Defense, Diplomacy, and Development. She's a cybersecurity and privacy entrepreneur. And she's also a real honest-to-God rocket scientist as well. I mean, she began her career actually working in classified environment in the space industry. She helped launch a US-made satellite for a European company on a repurposed Soviet ICBM from the Russian Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. I mean, if that's not global, I don't know what is. Alexa's a 3-time CEO and founder. Her current company is in stealth mode, but she's working on technology to make personal privacy and cybersecurity easier for individuals, which is a real passion of Alexa as we've gotten to know each other over the years. As I said, she is a rocket scientist. She holds three engineering degrees from the University of Michigan. I've got 2, so, go blue means a lot to some of us. Yes, absolutely, Alexa. And beyond that, she's also got an MBA from Harvard. A real clear underachiever, Alexa. Thanks for being our moderator today.
Oh, thank you so much, Stan. I am so excited to be here. This is a topic that is so close to my heart, especially with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I was on a call recently with a bunch of the Harvard W3D women, and everyone has questions and not many answers. So we're hoping that today's webinar will start to give some answers, but this is the beginning of a journey in a discussion about privacy. So, very excited to be here. I think it's a very hot topic right now for pretty much all of us. Now, I'm just going to go remind you, the audience and our panelists, right, that some of the community norms for this webinar. This is meant to be nonpartisan. We do not want to go deep into anyone's politics. It is really top level. It is privacy because it's going to, in fact, affect all of us. This is meant to educate us. It's the start of the bigger conversation. We want to assume everyone has best intentions to move this conversation forward. And I just want to remind you that, our individual panelists do not represent or speak on behalf of, the entire community. They have their own views and they will be able to share them. So, take them for what they are. But at the same time, you're going to have questions. So please put those questions for the panelists in the Q&A section here in Zoom. So let's get on and start introducing our panelists. So first, I'm going to introduce Timothy Toohey. Tim Toohey is a partner of Greenberg Glusker, and he leads its cybersecurity practice. Tim's work focuses on assuring that his clients' proprietary, personal, customer, and employee information and other sensitive data is fully protected and serves its intended purpose. As United States Certified Information Privacy Professional, a European Union Certified Information Privacy Professional, and a Certified Information Privacy Manager, Tim understands both the value and challenges of collecting, retrieving, storing, and employing data. Now, Tim is a hotshot himself. Tim received his bachelor's degrees from both Stanford and Oxford universities in modern history. He earned a PhD in history from Harvard, and he earned his law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. So we've got our rock star privacy lawyer on our panel. Next, we have Mark Hurwitz. Mark is a federally licensed private investigator who previously worked for the CIA. Mark began government service with Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and continued in the U.S. Department of State's Human Rights Bureau. He then worked in the White House for 3 years, where he served as the aide to the Deputy National Security Advisor. Mark then went on to become a counterterrorism officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and he later worked for the government in multiple overseas posts. He founded Crossroads Investigations in 2008. Mark received his bachelor's degree in political science from SUNY Buffalo and earned an MA degree in national security from the George Washington University in DC. And our third panelist, but not last and not final, is Kelley Misata. Dr. Kelley Misata is a cybersecurity expert. She is the founder and chief trailblazer of Sightline Security, president of the Open Information Security Foundation, and former director of communication of the Tor Project. A senior executive with 15 plus years of experience in cybersecurity and open source, Dr. Misata specializes in bridging gaps between technical and non-technical audiences. Now, with expertise rooted in direct experience as a survivor of cyberstalking, she's a recognized speaker, advocate, and leader in cybersecurity. Dr. Misata holds a BS in marketing from Westfield State University, an MBA from Bentley University, and a PhD in information security from Purdue University. And I just cannot tell you how rock star all of our panelists are here today. So we're going to do something that I think is going to really help get us all into a great mindset. Now, I've got a few polls here, and I'm asking everyone in the audience to please participate in these polls. The first poll, again, reminder, these are non-political. They're just to help get you in a mindset to think about privacy. So first poll is, do you think the overturning of Roe v. Wade, effectively the Dobbs decision, impacts your privacy? Yes, no, or maybe you're not sure. And we're going to do these quickly, so please get that answer in right away. And I'm going to stop this poll in about 10 seconds or less. Okay, I'm going to stop this poll here, and I'm going to share these results. So, okay, the majority of us do think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade does impact our privacy. So let's move on to the next one. Do you think, whoops, sorry, you can't see it. Do you think sharing vaccination status or having a vaccination status at all affects your privacy? All right. I'm going to wrap up this poll in just a second and share these results with you. So, yeah, most people think just even having a vaccination status at all is affecting your privacy. All right. So let's go on to the next question. Do you think registering your gun affects your privacy? You think having to register your gun or a gun affects your privacy? And we'll wrap up this poll in just a second. So get those answers in. And all right, pretty much most people think that having to register your gun affects your privacy. All right, the next poll. Do you think your use of social media affects your privacy? And we'll see if anyone is surprised when I put up the answers to this question. All right, I'm going to end the poll now, and I'm going to share these results. It's interesting that one person thinks it doesn't affect your privacy, but pretty much everyone does feel sharing on social media. All right, so next poll. A lot of us shop online. Do you think buying things online affects your privacy? And we'll wrap up this poll and show you the results. Okay, so people do think that buying online does affect their privacy. All right, getting down to the final two polls. Here is second to last poll. Do you think the government adequately protects your privacy? All right, we'll stop this poll and share the results. Okay, really, a lot of people do not think the government's protecting our privacy adequately. And our final question. Do you think businesses adequately protect your privacy? And we've thrown in an additional possibility, which is yes, no, you're not sure, or it depends. All right, and we'll stop this poll. All right, and a fair number of you feel that it depends, and a significant number of you feel that no, businesses don't adequately protect privacy. So on that note, having thought about our personal privacy, we're going to get into talking with our panelists. So we're going to start off with our first question, which is, how have things changed for our privacy since Roe v. Wade was overturned? And we're going to start off with Tim, the privacy lawyer.
Thanks, Alexa. Obviously, this is a situation that is very much in progress, but I think a little bit of background is necessary. We have a constitution which does not make an explicit reference to privacy, but does have a Fourth Amendment that protects people against unreasonable searches and seizures. Roe rested upon what's called the substantive due process argument, which found an implied right to privacy in Constitution. And this is not just Roe, but very importantly, other decisions affecting people's rights in the private realm, including Griswold, which involved contraception, Lawrence v. Texas, which involved anti-sodomy laws, and Obergefell, which involved same-sex marriage. So this really relates the constitutional element to what's called decisional privacy. But I think just as important, if not more important, is information privacy. When people think of privacy, they think often of the privacy of certain personal information, certain highly sensitive information, which a person may not want to share with another person. Or they may think of information that in certain contexts can become very important and necessary. And I think that especially in regards to Roe, is highlighting the importance of location information. And here's where issues become very, very complex. It's not a matter of constitutions anymore, but it's a matter of potential laws that are being passed by states and the federal government, as well as things that are being regulated by federal agencies such as the FTC. The real core concept is that the private information held by individuals can, depending on the context, be sensitive, and it can also be accessed both by individual businesses and by the government. And so we have a very complex world out there. Now, people immediately, I think, when you think of Roe, think of medical information and the information that could be protected by HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Remember, HIPAA has one P. But the information that you might think is sensitive, certainly post-Roe or pre-Roe, is not necessarily covered by HIPAA. HIPAA has a privacy rule which protects protected health information, but this only applies to what are called covered entities. So HIPAA would, of course, protect to some extent information held by a health professional, an insurance company, or hospital, but it may not relate, and it certainly doesn't relate to individuals' web searches, let alone the devices that they wear on their persons or the tracking apparatus or tracking programs that they may have on their phones. It also doesn't protect information that one person may choose to share with another person, or information that may be discovered by a nosy neighbor or things of that sort. So HIPAA is not necessarily going to be the answer to all of this. And on top of which, HIPAA does have exceptions for allowing government agencies under certain circumstances to subpoena or to have a court order to get what is protected health information. This is something that the Department of Health and Human Services is involved in now in trying to bolster this in light of the Dobbs decision, but it's still not clear how this is all going to play out. But the point is, HIPAA is not necessarily the answer. There already are enormous concerns that data brokers who gather a great deal of personal information about many of us through companies and devices may turn over that information to private individuals or to entities, which, and this may be perfectly legal, but you can find a situation where an individual was essentially working for the Catholic Church, was outed for his sexuality because a private organization found the information about his location information and tracked it through the social media application Grindr. Now, we also have state laws that are active in this area, and in California and in many other states, there's been a press to protect certain types of information and to give consumers greater control over the information which they have about themselves, and to opt out of certain sharing of information, including sensitive information, which can be precise geolocation information. Geolocation information is an area that I keep coming back to because location can be very revealing, particularly in the context we're discussing in the post-Roe world. But this is further complicated by the fact that we have, as the Dobbs decision reminded us, a federal system where states regulate certain things and the federal government may have some powers. Just yesterday, hot off the press, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act came through Congress, a committee of Congress, and may go before the recess to the House of Representatives as a whole. This would, in some ways, preempt state laws that are protecting privacy and strengthen the control of the federal government through the Federal Trade Commission of certain private information. But we don't know yet exactly how that's going to play out. So we have the states and the federal government here. We have the federal government stepping in an active way in certain ways to protect privacy in the light of the Dobbs decision. But we have certain states that are going to be doing things as well. Now, California is going to be increasing privacy in regard to certain matters, but there are other states that are going to be taking a very different attitude. And this is further complicated in the privacy realm by the fact that we have other constitutional rights. We don't have a constitutional right to data privacy, as arguably they do in the European Union, but we have rights to travel across state lines. We have First Amendment rights to view websites, and these may become targets of certain state laws that are trying to incentivize the enforcement either through criminal laws or through civil laws, so the so-called vigilante or bounty laws for people to try to enforce the prohibitions against abortion. So the whole field is very complicated. Obviously, I can't cover all of it. I just want to give you a view. It's a very complicated, evolving field. Privacy is very much in people's minds, and I think we're going to see some very interesting and complex use cases that with real human implications that are going to come out of this. It's the future is not clear, but it's going to be an extremely interesting one, and it's going to have a lot of consequences for many individuals.
Thank you, Tim. And can you repeat what came out of committee yesterday? That we just have a question that came through, just so people have that.
It's called the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. I don't know if it's been given its own handy acronym yet, but I guess that would be ADPPA, which is rather confusing for people in California because we have the CPPA. So it came out of committee with substantial bipartisan support. And it also came out of committee in a way that would maintain the preemption of state laws, notably California CPPA and CPRA.
Right, and thank you so much, Tim, for that kind of overview, because I think it was definitely for most of us, we needed a privacy lawyer to kind of give us the legal side of things. Now we're going to go through and next we're going to ask Mark on the legal side of things. As a private investigator, you focus on kind of the legal side of investigations. How do you see things having changed for our privacy since Roe was overturned?
Well, we haven't seen things change from the private investigation agency industry yet. Licensed investigators have access to a ton of information here in the US compared to what investigators have access to in other countries already. My concerns are opportunities for going after government contracts. When COVID started, there was contact tracing government contracts available that investigators went after because they had access to information that they could use to help the government, state governments do contact tracing. And my concern is, will those opportunities start to arise? Will investigators look for those to assist governments in using their access to information to help find people who are breaking the law?
Fantastic. And I guess let's get Kelley, your opinion, kind of as a cybersecurity expert who has had your privacy unfortunately invaded. Do you see things having changed for personal privacy since Roe itself was overturned?
There's some things that are starting to adjust. And let me just start off by saying privacy does not mean security. They're not equal. So it's almost like cousins in a family. Once you identify what is private to you, then you take the steps to secure it and you go down that road. So I just want to make sure that when we talk about privacy, we're talking about sort of what's important to us and what we're sort of thinking about securing as that next step. Because people are using technology without thought. I mean, how many apps do people have on their phones? A recent study I saw that the average person has about 45 apps on their mobile devices at any given time, and they only use about 10% of those applications. So when you think about all the data that you're feeding into just that small device that you're walking around with, and all those organizations, not only that are consuming that data, but also sharing it with their partners. It's a huge web of information that's being stored out or being sent out there into the wild. So I think one of the biggest implications of the decision by the Supreme Court, in my view, actually is kind of positive, because people are starting to look at what they're using, where their health information data is going, and it's raising their level of awareness around, should I protect that? Should I secure that? Is that important to me? And by having general users stepping in and asking those questions, that actually is raising the consciousness around what data they're putting out there into the wild. So from a security standpoint, I'm standing here going, okay, great. Now we've got all these wonderful people who are saying, should I have that app, that health app on my phone because it's tracking my cycle? Or should I actually delete it? Those are great things to think about, not just with Roe v. Wade, but to think about across our digital lives. So there's lots to unpack in all this. And I love Tim's sort of outline. I'm going to go back and listen to this recording and be like, okay, I've got notes to write. Because when I was going through PhD and going through my own personal situation, I did a lot of research on understanding how digital harassment worked, how it was sort of woven into the laws. And again, protecting privacy as sort of the cousin to security was even more complicated. So part of the problem that we're facing in being able to look at this issue, one is that many people don't know how to define what's private to them. They don't have that sort of frame of mind yet. And if you can't define it for yourself, how are you going to define it for groups of people, family members, companies, communities? It's going to get really difficult. The second thing is our interaction with technology has become so unconscious that we forget to step back and say, should I be putting my credit card, or should I be putting my vaccine card in that application to be able to make my life convenient? We're not taking that pause to step back and say, should I be doing this?
If I can jump in on that, I think Kelley makes a really good point, and it goes to what Stan wrote in the Q&A about how do we define privacy for the context of this discussion. And if you haven't seen it, he wrote, for the purposes of today's program, think of privacy as the information that one chooses not to share. And certainly as investigators, we have access to information on social media where people will post comments and photos, and there are matters of public record, voter registration, driver's license information. These are things that we assume will be shared to some degree. But there are many things that are being shared that we don't realize, that we're not giving consent to. And I'll give you a great example. License plate recognition. We as investigators can see where a car is parked over the last 90 days. Is that something that anyone on this discussion thinks is privacy, that information that they think they can share, that they're giving consent to share? When police cars drive around the public parking lots, when they drive up and down streets, when towing trucks go up and down streets, they're photographing license plates. And I, as an investigator, can buy that information and look over the 90 days. Where has this car been parked? No one gave consent for that.
Yeah, and can I just riff off of that for just a minute, Alexa? Sorry. See, this is the fun of having a dynamic panels that we just go, oh yeah, I want to talk about what Mark just said. So just something to add, and as you mentioned in the introduction, and thank you. And by the way, I didn't know you were a rocket scientist. That's really cool. I came into security through this really horrible personal experience. And when I was asked to do this panel, I actually did a little bit of reflecting on that again, because the redefining what privacy meant for me personally took a lot of time. And part of it, to Mark's point, is, and he's over here in my Zoom box, part of it was startling to me to see how pieces of information that in my world were not related and not connected to reality of who I am or things that I was doing were used to craft a persona about me that was inaccurate. And that could be sort of used to frame people's perceptions of me. And I think that's part of this challenge of all this information flowing around and not really understanding, where do I have power to protect it from a technical standpoint, but where do I have rights from a legal standpoint to hold on to that, to say that if that's compromised and that's being used to, track me or defame me, can I turn around to law enforcement and say, I have rights around that? And I think that's the tricky part, because it's so, like, all these little dots are connected, and it makes it like you just want to pull your hair out. So just to rip off of what Mark said.
And actually,
if I could add one brief thing here. I mean, one of the important things to keep in mind on the legal realm is that what is considered personal information or personal data has expanded enormously. That we started off with laws that really sort of talked about credit cards and social security numbers and things that are obviously sensitive, but that we're getting into a situation now where there is a desire through underlying these privacy laws to try to provide consumers or individuals rights in regard to collection of a whole broad range of information, including biometric information, precise geolocation information. The problem is that a lot of this is being collected automatically. It's being collected without the knowledge of individuals, and that whether opting into collections of this is really going to solve the problem or not is a good open question. But I think that this, to me, the post-Roe world has emphasized how much this relates to individual autonomy. I think that this is a way that privacy is being seen in a different way. It's okay, someone knows that I rent a scooter and I go from one place to the next, and they might collect that information on a countywide basis, as it happens in Los Angeles, or on another basis in other places. But that information, when combined with other information, can be sensitive, and it may be collected by third parties who have a right to it, as Mark said, and yet our autonomy is being affected by this. And I think that it's autonomy in a lot of different ways, but it's most dramatically an issue of autonomy for some people that will be affected by this particular decision.
I think this is a fantastic, kind of setup for, kind of understanding the landscape. So, thanks for that. I'm going to move on to some more questions that we already have kind of from SecureTheVillage, and then we've got a lot of questions now starting to come in to our Q&A. So we know that there are a number of state laws since Roe v. Wade was overturned that are impacting potentially certain people, depending on the state you live in, certain people's privacy, because it may be giving incentives to both law enforcement, vigilante bounty hunters. For instance, the state of Texas is paying a bounty for people who are successfully prosecuted, and also for hackers, right? Who may see it as an opportunity to blackmail people that maybe are breaking laws or think that they're breaking laws. And so we've got these three different distinct areas that could be, taking advantage in many ways of overturning of Roe v. Wade and new laws being introduced as a result, or the trigger laws that kind of get defaulted to in various states. And I guess a question possibly more for you, Tim, but other panelists are, welcome to answer. Given these changes and these kind of these three parties, if you will, that could be going after individual people, specifically in Roe v. Wade, when do you think we might start seeing them impacting someone's daily life? And when might these ramifications? When might we start seeing cases come to court? Because it really is about people's privacy, and people are doing interesting things to try and protect their privacy. I will tell you right now, I've already heard that a lot of women are telling their daughters, and they themselves are deleting period tracking apps. They are no longer telling their doctors the date of their last period, which is a very standard question that we women are asked every time we go see a doctor. And so, these are privacy decisions, if you will, but they're going to start impacting and affecting our healthcare. But so I guess when will we start seeing the real ramifications of certain state laws, if you will, on people's privacy and just overall livelihoods.
Some of the state laws are very much in the progress in a state of being developed at this point in time. So we have to kind of see how that shakes out. I think it's important to distinguish here between the criminal laws. You know, you might have a law that finds that certain individuals are aiding and abetting the violation of criminal violation in a particular state. And those laws come with particular protections for the individuals who are accused of that. And you know, there's questions of whether you could get someone in a different state under an aiding and abetting law as a criminal law. But what I think is more interesting, I guess I'll use the bland word, is these incentivizing laws, which are civil laws, which are being used, which may be passed to allow individuals to bring civil lawsuits against those who are either aiding and abetting in some way, you know, assisting in abortion being provided. You have jurisdictional issues. Can you go after someone in California from another state if that person is located in California and doesn't have minimum contacts? But the thing about these civil laws is that some of the protections, which may make it difficult to prosecute someone under a criminal law, such as the right of interstate travel, or First Amendment rights, may not be as applicable in the civil context. So the question of when, I can't say precisely, but I think you're going to see a lot of activity in this area, and it's going to take some time for those lawsuits to be brought. There will be publicity, there will be dramatic cases that will get a lot of publicity, and the question will be whether how much interest does law enforcement have in focusing on certain criminal laws, and how motivated will individuals be, you know, in the civil context to go after their neighbors or friends or whatever. It is a fairly new area. There's been some people that have drawn connections to this, to a very troubled period in history involving the fugitive slave laws. There are no exact parallels, of course, in this area, but it's a very tough area which involves federalism, a combination of civil and criminal law, and a lot of things which are somewhat if not totally unprecedented.
And I don't know if Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon that about the state laws, and I'll use an example of GPS tracking. So in Florida, you cannot use a GPS tracker on someone else's car. It's illegal. An investigator went to prison for that when they put trackers on some commissioners' cars when they were running for re-election. But in some states, it is legal. And you can, and it may be in support of a state law. And what happens if someone has a GPS tracker in their car and goes across state lines? I don't believe there's a federal law about GPS trackers. It's governed state by state. That's just one example of something that our industry has been watching GPS trackers for a long time, and how it affects a person's privacy. Some states take it more seriously than others.
Alexa, can I jump in on this a little bit? So your example was really startling to me because part of privacy and security, in my opinion, is about trust. And the polls really sort of brought that out in the conversation for this panel, because if you trust law enforcement, if you trust the legal system, if you trust the companies that you're sharing this information with to protect you, then you share it and you feel comfortable about it. It's startling to me to think about people not trusting their doctors to be able to tell them vital health information because they don't know where that trail of information is going to go. So part of this conversation is understanding that when you do share information, whether you're sharing it with your friend or your doctor, you're putting it out there into the wild and you just don't know where it goes. And that is frightening for a lot of people, which most people, when they're afraid or concerned about security or they're concerned about ramifications of the law, they do one of two things. They either shut down and close down everything, or they circumvent it. They find another way around. And that can create a whole bunch of other problems from not only a law enforcement standpoint, but also a security standpoint for some of these folks. And that's kind of scary and sad.
And as I mentioned, this is the beginning of a conversation on privacy. And we kind of, the overturning of Roe v. Wade is the catalyst, I think, because it really is affecting a lot of people's thinking. And people are now much more aware and paying attention more to the personal impact. So please keep putting your questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to move on now we've got several more questions. And I'm just going to ask, right? So we've got 3 amazing panelists. And I'm just wondering, has your job changed at all since the law was overturned?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. From our perspective, it has. People are starting to think about it differently. But there's also this layer of fear around it. And again, as I mentioned, that if you're fearful, you're going to circumvent. So you're going to want to know, how does encryption work? What applications can I use to talk to family and friends if I need to go, have this service done for me? There's lots of conversations about even participating in protests because of the availability of cameras out there. Should I be out there supporting whatever side of the equation you're on? Should I be out there supporting that because there's going to be cameras either on the streets or in people's phones? So there's a lot of big just question marks in people's minds. And from the security side, again, every time privacy comes up and security kind of melds into it, we always look at it of how can we help them think about the data differently? How can we help them kind of take that deep breath? Okay, don't react. Let's figure out what the best next steps are. And from a data privacy standpoint, that definition of understanding it first is great, but also it's situational. If you are a victim of domestic violence, you are going to have a different paradigm around privacy. You're going to have different needs around privacy. The example that Mark gave around police, taking pictures of your license plate, that's going to kind of probably raise your eyebrows and go, oh my God. But if you're just kind of an average person living their average life with nothing going on, you're not going to think about those things. So it's very much a situational thing for folks, but it's being available to help step in and say, let's unpack what you have and how you're thinking about this so we can put security measures in place that are appropriate for what your needs are.
Oh, you're on mute, Alexa.
Any changes to your job, Mark or Tim?
No, not yet.
No, not really, but I suspect that there's going to be greater attention that's given to collection of geolocation information, and that those issues are already sort of front and center. They're going to become even more front and center, and that people should be aware, if possible, what apps they have on their phone that are collecting location information, to anticipate one of your other questions.
I mean, Alexa, what would be really great is if we had sort of better understanding of the terms of use that are used for these applications, because when people are using these things on their devices, those terms of use, I love you lawyers out there in the world, you guys are amazing, but you write these big, long things that most average people aren't going to read. And us in security are like, okay, so let's sort of highlight the things that say, your information will be sold to any third party at our discretion at any time. That's kind of a big deal if you're using an application that you're going to be putting data in that you would consider, based on your definition of privacy, of high criticality, right? So you're going to want to know how those applications are using your data. So it would be great if, as we sort of evolve down the road in all of this, if we have better ways just to inform those end users of, here are the legal rights of the companies building these applications. Here are your legal rights. You get to choose whether you're in or out, download or don't download.
I'm very pessimistic on that one, I'm afraid.
I know, I was going to wear my rose-colored glasses today, Tim, but I left them over there.
It's true that California does have some control over that in terms of sort of a just-in-time notification about sharing information, but we don't have a complete opt-in system in the United States as the European Union that sort of has a default of not sharing. We have a default of sharing, and it gets extremely complicated from there, particularly including the advertising ecosystem, as it is euphemistically called, that is the sort of way in which people make money by sharing information now. And California CCPA, CPRA is going to have a sort of opt-in for and control over sensitive information. Whether that survives the federal regime or not, we shall see. But that's the real area. I mean, you can certainly think right now, do I use any apps that share biometric or biometric information or location information as top of mind of what I should go and look at and see if that's being shared with any third parties. Going to the terms of use, I'm afraid, is a very cumbersome and tiresome exercise, and you have to read those terms of use, which I draw up, I write them, and I try to make them as clear as possible, but I'm sorry, they're not as clear is conceivably possible, and they don't tell many people what they need to know in a very clear way.
And, I think it's interesting because I learned in a previous call with these panelists that certain information, it's not even in terms of service. Mark, you pointed out that law enforcement collects data in a parking lot of license plate recognition and sells that data. There are a lot of things that when our panelists have been talking about, our data ends up online, ends up being given out to people without our knowledge. And it's not just purely online looking at terms of service and privacy policies. It's literally things in our daily lives that are what we would think of as almost private. It's just, it may not be. So people can find out that you went to the grocery store or the porn club, whatever. It's, it's something you think twice about.
Yeah, and I'll give another example. We do surveillance. We follow people all the time for all types of different reasons, and one reason is work non-compete. For example, is someone working in an office at a business that they have agreed that they wouldn't be working at. What's to stop someone from hiring an investigator to just follow someone, see where they go? And that's, there's no consent given, but you're driving on public roads.
So it's a crazy world right now. And, I've been talking to some hacker type individuals who have kind of suggested that, even the vigilante laws, the laws that may encourage them to become vigilantes to go after people for a bounty, they're like, that's not really the thing that's going to give a payoff to them. They've talked about, blackmail is going to be the way they do it. And part of the way they're going to go get that information for blackmail is going to be part online and part offline information. So it can come full circle back to, what does it mean when we talk about privacy? What is private to us? What do we actually personally care about? I'm going to move this conversation on a little bit. Well, go ahead, Kelley.
There's one other sort of layer to put to that, Alexa, is that, you had your 3 buckets. One is also the spoofers. So as this unveils, you're going to have those attackers that are going to say that they've got private information about you. They're going to try and use that, and they likely don't have anything, but the more the general public sort of raises fear and uncertainty and, stress about this, the more that actually opens up the opportunity for organizations that just want to kind of phish you. to say, hey, we've got stuff and we're going to come in and, go buy us some Amazon gift cards and we'll give you all of your, health information.
Yeah, it's turning into a scary world, but we're going to come back and give you some suggestions to protect yourself. But before we get to that point, let's just think about employees, right? Most of us are employees, or we may be the employers themselves. But what do we see as far as the panel? What do employers need to modify? Is any policies or practices as a result of the Dobbs decision? We're aware that some large employers are going to pay for employees to go out of state for a treatment if they so choose. But again, that has implications for employee health, privacy, and vice versa to the employers. What should employees or us as individuals modify specifically as a result of the Dobbs decision? Go ahead.
My question just quickly on that is, would employers normally put something out there to say you can go out of state for a procedure? That just seems out of the ordinary anyway, right? So if they put it into their policies, that's kind of shining a big giant light on it. I haven't heard of any employers doing that or thinking about that, but
some are actually suggesting it, and there are a lot of cautionary posts online from lawyers talking about the potential liabilities that may come from that directly to directors and officers of companies who are doing positions like that, and whether it could be covered by insurance if there is a lawsuit or a regulatory or a legal action against them. So that's yet another area that's going to involve a lot of different non-privacy laws, but that could have implications. Employees have a lot of protections in terms of the protections of that protected health information, but whether employees will feel comfortable with those protections is another matter.
And is there anything that, we as individuals that you guys kind of think about that we absolutely must do as an employee to protect ourselves from an employer? Is there anything specific that comes to mind? You may have addressed it kind of thinking about the HIPAA side of things. Oh, okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So, and Tim, you did a great job of kind of highlighting what HIPAA kind of protects. But just out of curiosity, what kind of personal information can be handed over to law enforcement with respect to a subpoena or medical records? I'm not sure if Mark, you or Tim kind of understands that, because I think that's something that's fearful for a lot of people is what is it that law enforcement can subpoena as far as our personal privacy?
Well, this is not a new area. There's been some clarifications on this, so-called clarifications on this. Obviously, the protected health information from a covered entity, or a business associated covered entity, there has to be a very careful analysis of whether that information, whether the law enforcement agency has gone through the right steps and has the right form and has the right protections and has court ordered subpoena to turn over information. But potentially, this is going to be an area of new impression if it's information that could be used to prosecute an individual for violating the state law against abortion. There has been some clarification saying that this is not something that people should be afraid of, because it is, there are protections already under the privacy rule and under HIPAA. But frankly, this is going to be tested. This is going to be one of those areas that's going to be tested, and the limits of what will be handed over, particularly if it's coming to a state to protected health information of an entity in the state where there's no abortion allowed. It's it's allowed under some circumstances, but it's going to depend a great deal on what the individual case is. And that's not terribly helpful and or assuring, but I think it's going to be something that we're going to see that's going to be a very large friction point between the federal government, which protects protected health information, and certain state governments.
And Alexa,
We get asked.
Go ahead,
Go ahead,
Mark.
Kelley. No, please.
And actually, Mark, I'm going to probably lobby this over to you afterwards, because in some of the research that I've done, part of dissertation and the work we do at Sightline, so we help nonprofit organizations navigate cybersecurity. And some of that work is to help them, particularly organizations that are missioned in a way that help people in compromised parts of the world, help people who might domestic violence, human trafficking, those sorts of examples. And what we talk to them a lot about is some of the technologies that they use that they think are protecting their data and keeping them private, like a VPN and other technology tools, that it's critical to read the privacy use or the privacy statements of those organizations, because you'd be surprised at how many of those technology solutions that say, we will protect your privacy by using our tool. If you read the fine print, they will say, if we are subpoenaed by law enforcement, we will hand over your data. And that's something that, again, we're trying to get used to from the security and user side of things, of just helping people understand that just because you are going to use a piece of technology to protect your privacy and to protect you doesn't mean that that organization will not give up your data if they are pressed by law enforcement. And then it connects the dots, which is why I like Mark's work, because he connects all the dots to, like, you know, solve stories and crimes and all that stuff.
Well, I'll say that we do get asked all the time for private medical information. People assume that we can access that, and people want to get that on other people. And we're always appalled when we get callers like that. But people are always seeking that kind of information for all kinds of reasons.
Mark, they're seeking it, but are you able to?
No, we shut that down. I mean, we're not allowed to. HIPAA prevents us from accessing that information. Yeah, sure.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about, Julie, can you put up or put in the chat put up the slide, because I think now would be a good time to look at what can we as individuals do to protect ourselves a bit, as far as particularly the online privacy. I mean, offline, we've talked a little bit about here, but particularly we feel there are 5 critical do's and don'ts, you know, for online privacy. And there are going to be nuances to this depending on what kind of cybersecurity or privacy individual you talk to. But I think we can all agree, first and foremost, you should identify the information that you want or should or need to keep private. And there, you know, we've given some examples here. You know, most people say, I want to protect my finances, or I want to protect my identity or my reputation. You know, but you for yourself need to understand what you really should be protecting for yourself. And then you need to protect it. And one of the ways in the online world is we are being forced into having a username and a password to access almost every account and most apps. So protect those credentials, the ways that you log in. So, you know, come up with a way that you can have hopefully unique, complex passwords for the things that are most important to you. And, you know, it's highly recommended by most security professionals to use 2-factor authentication. And I think the biggest thing, as Kelley had brought up, is encrypting your data. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. You just pick one app and you encrypt your data. It's a little bit more complex than that. And we have companies out there that are looking at making some of this stuff easier for you, the individual. But if it's not even on your radar, there are things that you can do to protect your sensitive information. And part of that is protecting the way that you share your information. And so that gets down to limit what you share. You know, look, don't assume, by the way, text messaging and emails traditionally are not completely secure. They are not necessarily end-to-end encrypted. They can be Google Mail, for instance. People can Google scans your emails to decide which ads to serve up to you. So there are a number of things that people assume, we as individuals assume is somehow protecting us. And it gets to that terms of service and the privacy policy, that a lot of the technology we're using for sharing and what we're sharing isn't really protecting us. I would say more than anything, this is me personally, think about what you post on social media, because that really is one big way that you tend to be exposing way too much private information. And I know, Mark, I don't know, Julie, if you're able to put into the chat, I don't know if it's already there, the information. There's a link on social media that Mark at Crossroads Investigations has put together. It's very simple. Four of the big social media places to think about that. Your location sharing, you can't exactly hide your license plate in a parking lot, but you can hide your location in an app in the privacy settings. And so think about that. And at the same time, we talked about, who was it that brought up the VPN, hiding your internet activity. There are a number of ways you can think about hiding your internet activity. If you don't know how to do this, I would definitely say consult an expert. SecureTheVillage is also here. We've got a number of players out there who do things to kind of help support you. But it's something that you need to think about. If you are someone who has taken a decision, in a state, after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that you decide you want to go get an abortion and you search abortion online, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in your regular old Google browser, from your home Wi-Fi. There's a whole bunch of different things that you might want to contemplate. Okay, maybe I should keep some of my searches private and come up with a solution for that. And same thing with, all these apps, everything, they contain so much data about you. You might want to think about the accounts you don't need that are less secure, get rid of them, delete them. But the internet, it's called the Wayback Machine because it has information on you that really never gets completely deleted. So maybe you want to obscure the data and think about that. So put in some false information because if it's going to be there in posterity, maybe that doesn't need to have the absolute perfect information about things that are incredibly personal to you. I don't know for our panelists if you have additional thoughts, but we wanted to just kind of give you something. Go ahead, Kelley.
Oh my God. Sorry, Alexa. This is I love this. I love some of the comments in here in the Q&A. Someone asked about, how do we manage the information that Siri and Alexa are collecting from us? There's not a lot you can do. You're using a device that is literally listening for you to say, can you please order me more Pop-Tarts? So just understand that by you using those technologies, you are opting into it listening to you. There are some security controls in there, but it really is, you're just kind of surrendering to it. The one thing I do want to mention based on what Alexa was just saying is that when you're thinking about securing information that you find or you've determined is really critical and private to you, there are two channels that you have to think in parallel. One is as that information moves through systems, through the internet, the encryption of that movement is one thing. The encryption of that data as an entity is another. They're not the same thing. So people often say, well, it's encrypted. It's like, okay, well, encrypted where? Is it encrypted in motion or is it encrypted at rest? The content being encrypted. So just kind of keep an eye on, terminology in cybersecurity is a royal pain in the neck. We get it. I understand it 200%. So feel free to reach out to me if anybody has any questions about what are all these things mean. But just understand that when you're talking about encrypting data, it's always in those two channels. It's not just, oh, we encrypt our data. Okay, well, what does that truly mean? And many of these organizations do have privacy statements. So just go in and check to see what they'll do. to protect you in case of something going sideways. Sorry, Alexa, that was my big, I had to mention it.
If I can build on what Kelley was saying, we, at my company, every investigation starts with an online investigation. So we take a lot of precautions ourselves to keep ourselves safe and anonymous. And we've developed best practices over time, and maybe Kelley and Tim and Alexa have some input as well. But we have found the best email encryption program, for example, to be Proton Mail. The best private messaging app to be Signal. A lot of colleagues from the government, former government employees, they also like Signal. The best no-log VPN, which is free to use, is hidemyass.com. These are just basic things that you can use. It's something to start with. There's also an online tracker protection called Ghostery. When you go to a website, from one website to another, there's hundreds sometimes of trackers following you from one to another to identify who you are. So Ghostery is a great one. And I want to throw just one more thing out, and I'll put it into, I can put those into the chat. Let me just put those in the chat right now. And for what it's worth, there's also, I don't usually mind. I allow my iPhone and Google and Alexa to have access to my life on my non-work stuff, but there is something in the iPhone that I don't like. It watches your significant locations and it keeps a log of it. And there's an easy way to turn that off. And I'm going to put that into the chat as well. If you have an iPhone, how to turn that off. And when you get down to the penultimate and last steps, you have to kind of scroll all the way down because it's not easy to find, but it's there. So I just put that in the chat as well.
And be careful that sometimes when updates are done on your devices, some of the privacy settings go back to the default. So whenever there's a major update and your phone's like, I'm going to spend all night updating you to the next operating system on your iPhone, it's a good idea just to go back into your phone and make sure that the privacy settings, such as Mark mentioned, and others, are set to be what you want them to be. I think the greatest challenge with balancing privacy, security, and convenience is just wanting to have all these freedoms and do all this great stuff and not want to be bogged down by, oh my God, do I have to have 12 characters in my password in order to be able to, order my pizza? Well, it depends. So some of this is also with security, defining what level of security you need to protect the things that you've identified are the most vital to your life. As a survivor of cyberstalking, my lens on privacy is different than other people's lens. So you have to sort of look at it through your own eyes.
And again, building off of what Kelley was saying, not only your phones, but your social media. Yes. They tend to update a few times a year, which is why we have to update our social media privacy tip sheet a few times a year. They will change their defaults on their own. So it's good, quarterly to look at your social media profiles as if you are the public to ensure that you are actually hiding and protecting what you think you are.
Yeah, and another way to protect your privacy, sort of in that space of protecting and encrypting information that is flowing through the internet, that, encryption in motion, is using Tor. And Tor gets a bad rap. I worked for Tor for several years. And actually, I went to go work for Tor because my stalker used it. And I wanted to know how it worked. So I went to work for the company. But what's interesting about it is that if you are doing something that you really have to stay safe and protected, that's a really good technology and it's free.
Okay, this is absolutely fantastic. And, one more thing I want to cover, because I want to just fully focus then on kind of questions from the audience. But, what can we do to get better laws passed? Because I think this is the big thing that I think we've highlighted, is that the laws are in some ways not necessarily working to our advantage. Privacy is something that we are we've been assuming it is there for us, but at the same time, when it comes to online things, we have to opt out currently, as opposed to opting in, which is what I'm sure every one of us would prefer, except for the businesses. But what can we do for laws? And I know there's some organizations out there, and I'd love to kind of have each of the panelists give us some suggestions on what can we do to get better laws passed, and what organizations are out there that you would recommend that anyone who's interested might get involved with.
Well, I guess I would speak up on behalf of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is really very much involved in this. And it's really a matter of it's hard to an individual voice to get through, but you can identify those individuals, both in the federal and state government, that have an interest in this area, and make yourself known either directly to them or through an organization. But it's not just EFF, it's a whole variety of organizations. If you have an organization that you belong to that has an interest, a nonprofit organization of any sort, it doesn't have to be the ACLU or the EFF or the well-known organizations, have them talk about it, whether it's a trade organization, a chamber of commerce, a parents organization, organizations of any sort, because their voices probably could be heard equally and probably even more persuasively than those that are professional privacy advocates.
You want to go next, Mark?
Well, I'm conflicted because as a citizen, I want to have as much privacy as possible, and I support all the points that are being made in this conversation. As an investigator, I want access to as much information as possible, right? So, but I will say that looking at investigating people in California or New York is a lot more difficult than investigating people in other states. Those states have taken better precautions to protect their citizens' private information when it comes to criminal backgrounds, driver's license information, vehicle information, voter registration information sometimes. So those would be, I would say those would be laws, those would be areas to emulate if you're looking to try to increase a person's privacy elsewhere in the country. But don't do it. Okay.
I would actually say, echo Tim's standpoint on EFF. EFF is a really great organization. They put a lot of time and effort into raising these questions with folks. There's also, associations of privacy professionals out there if you want to sort of see what are the inner workings of conversations around these issues. But get involved wherever and however you can. But also, start drafting your own personal privacy definition. What does it mean to you? Start looking at it sort of closer to home, because that also helps you frame better understanding and conversation around how to help build greater voices around laws. And I do like my rose-colored glasses, Tim. Next year, I'm going to wear them.
So just to repeat, Tim started off talking about the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I don't know that, did any of you mention the ACLU? They're quite big into privacy, as I understand it as well. So if people want to get involved, and by the way, SecureTheVillage is, we'll have on their website a number of these things. Every one of the ones that it was mentioned by our panelists will appear on the SecureTheVillage website as well. We will be, the recording we will be sending out to you, just so everyone kind of will have access to that, because I'm sure we're all going to want to go back and reflect on this. So let's move into some of the audience Q&A now. And Stan, you've been watching some of these questions. Are there any in particular that you want to make sure we haven't yet answered to make sure that we do answer them?
Well, first, excellent discussion. It's been fabulous listening to it. The one question that I saw up here, and it's a subtle question. So here's my cell phone. Well, there it is. Somewhere it's there. it's this background don't let you see it. But anyway, with my cell phone, if I turn my cell phone off, what's still tracking? What's it's still collecting? Do I have to hit it with a sledgehammer if I wanted to stop doing stuff? This seems to be, just one of these ongoing kinds of questions. And frankly, I mean, I'm 40 years in this space. I don't know the answer to that question. I look it up online and there's no clear answer. What are your opinions? What are your thoughts on that? Mark,
Yes.
Maybe you're the right one to, or yeah, I don't know.
As far as a phone number,
Yeah, I mean, if I shut this off, is it still collecting information? Is it still doing anything?
I'm not a cyber expert, but my understanding is if the phone is completely powered off, that's going to be your best bet. In the old days, when there was a removable battery, that's what we did, is remove the battery. You can't do that anymore.
That's right.
Dan,
And that's when I knew the right answer as well. Take the battery out.
It's actually, there are systems that are running in the background that even when the phone is turned off, it is not completely disconnected. So that's why people used to put their phones in the crazy bags, and they put the bag in the freezer and, try and kind of contain it so nothing could get at it. So since we can't take out the battery, assume that if you turn off your phone is still running some of the systems in the background.
but the thing to know is that, and I've seen these sort of reports from the telecommunications carriers, is that phone, when it's on, is pinging cell phone towers at a remarkable number of times per day, per hour. And so that you can have a very, very complete picture of someone's movements. Now, most of them are boring because people are fairly stationary, but there are enormously long reports for very short periods of time that the telecommunications providers can provide, and to law enforcement authorities regarding your geolocation in regard to cell phone towers.
Yeah, and you can't always, from a cybersecurity standpoint, our biggest question, actually, Mark, you probably come up with this a lot, is that how do you determine that the device is the person? The device isn't always the person. You can put your Fitbit on your dog and have it run around your yard and get all your steps for the day, right? Your phone can get in the hands of someone malicious and walk around to a porn shop or wherever you want to go that you're not supposed to be. So there is a challenge with always linking a person with the device. And again, that's Mark's area, not my area.
yeah, well, that's what someone else could drive their car. A million, a picture speaks a million words. So, unless you don't have a photo of someone, either through surveillance or if someone took a picture of someone and posted it on social media, that's going to be the only surefire way, of course. Yeah. Going to the geolocation, we used to be able to, until 2011, we could do that as investigators. We had access to that ability to geolocate a phone. And I know that there are companies out there that offer to send text messages with links. And if you click on the link, it will give you a person's location. So never click on a weird link that, it's like, it could be like from a weather app, like click here to download your area's weather, or totally innocuous that will give you a second thought, a second minute about maybe clicking on that link. But there are many, many apps out there that do that. So clicking on any link could give away your geolocation for maybe not even a nefarious location. Any link, when you go to any website, can collect your IP and your geolocation information.
And actually, on that note, we've got a question. Is using a VPN, is it basic or integral way to protecting our internal privacy, or is it just excessive and unneeded for a lot of the time? I think that's kind of gets into geolocation as much as anything. So
Right.
I'd love to hear the thoughts, especially from you, Kelley, on using a VPN.
So VPN is a great extra layer of security, particularly if you want to protect sort of prying eyes to what you're doing. It's not perfect though, because a VPN is a one-hop layer of privacy. Tor, as I mentioned earlier, the Tor project uses a browser, it's created that software around that browser that's a 3-hop. So it's slower, it's chunkier, it's more complicated, all of that stuff. It's why used by some really awful people in the world. It's also used by some folks that really, their lives are at risk if they don't use, highly sophisticated technology. But for an average user, particularly one that is being asked by their company to use a VPN, it's a really good next layer. Because when you think about security, it's not just about sort of locking things down in your world, it's about making it harder for the bad guys to get in. And if you can add an extra layer that's going to make it harder for them to get in, or that they're going to get flagged on their way in, that's better. And that's where VPN comes into play. So from a security standpoint, it's always a question of, is that the appropriate layer of security for what you're doing, what information you want to protect, what organization you're working for? It's always good just to ask that question. I wouldn't use a VPN to make a hair appointment online, but I'd use a VPN to do my banking, if that helps parse it out.
Here's an example where we use VPNs. Well, we use VPNs whenever we're accessing personal information, but when we're at a conference at a public hotel, for example, the public Wi-Fi, it could say Hilton free Wi-Fi. And you don't know if it's the hotel Wi-Fi or if it's a bad actor who's created a hotspot with that name, who, when you log into their hotspot, now they have access to your phone and your data. So that's why we never use public Wi-Fi in any of our devices in our company.
Yeah, sometimes at security conferences, at the attendees,
Well, they do it on purpose.
We'll do that on purpose.
Yeah, they do it on purpose. Yeah, to embarrass everybody. Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to use public Wi-Fi, at least use the VPN on your phone and computer.
Yeah, don't do banking at Starbucks, please.
Yeah.
As a rule of thumb, don't do banking at Starbucks.
All right, and on that note, because we're up against time, I mean, we've had people on here, and it's amazing that we've had a really dedicated audience with us for so long. But what is one thought or top action? This is for our panelists, that you want our audience to kind of take, do, think about when they leave this webinar? I think that's to wrap up, I just want to make sure that what's that one thought you want to leave everyone with? And
I would start. I would say, after listening to all of these security professionals talk, but I would say that even before you start thinking about all these security protections, which are very important, be conscious. Be conscious of what you're doing. Be conscious of what information you are sharing, because I'm going back to the issues here, the issues relating to privacy, location, autonomy, biometrics. We're entering into a new era where I think that if you're an affected individual in this particular space, in the post-Roe world, even if you're not an affected individual, you should be conscious of this and the complexity of there are private companies out there, there's the government, there are neighbors, there's talking about information to other people. Be conscious of what you're sharing and of how it could be used in the hands, not just of bad guys, hackers, but of people that may have a different point of view than you do as to certain basic things and certain basic issues that you're involved in.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, again, every investigation nowadays starts with social media. So, be conscious of who you're sharing your information with. I'm a big social media person. I post all day long, but I have my privacy settings set correctly. People who I don't want looking at it are not looking at it. So again, for example, Facebook allows you to view your profile as public. Do that once in a while, or go to an acquaintance's phone and look at your profiles, that you're not friends with that person, to see what it looks like to a stranger, to make sure that you're not oversharing with the general public.
Yeah, and Tim, I was like applauding back here when I was hearing you say, remain conscious. So you should come over and work in security more often. From my side, I think folks always like to sort of step back and say, that's never going to happen to me. And so, all these complicated security folks saying, tell us to do all these things is a real pain in the neck. And I don't want to do because nothing's going to happen to me. Maybe when you feel comfortable, just kind of in your own head, walk through what would you do if you were compromised in some regard? What would you do if you found out your bank account fell into the wrong hands? What would you do? And kind of walk through maybe some of those steps. Because the worst thing about ever sort of having to come up against this is the surprise and then the fear and then the panic. And with all of those emotions in place, you can't make good decisions around how to protect yourself and how to get on the other side of it. So start thinking about, what would you do if your social media account was compromised? What would you do if your credit card was compromised? And if you kind of have that checklist, even in the back of your head, that's a great first step. On top of everything that Mark and Tim said, do all those things too. But, if something does go sideways, take a big, deep breath. There's lots of resources out there in the world and always somebody there to help.
And I think that's the thing, that there's always someone there to help. There are a lot of cybersecurity professionals who are willing to give back. And so Secure the Village is putting together the resources needed for individuals, whether you're in absolute crisis mode because maybe you have been hacked, or you are just looking to do some preventative measures. We're trying to kind of pull together things for not just enterprises, but literally for us as individual people on this planet Earth. And on that note, this was the beginning of the conversation. We actually are going to have more privacy-related events. There are some topics that we could see in the Q&A that we will look to include in future events. And you can feel free to get in touch with me, with Secure the Village, any of our panelists, if there are topics you'd love to see further explored. We want to make sure we're covering them and we're addressing topics that are important to people. And I just cannot thank enough our panelists, because we have been in very short order. We planned this event just weeks ago. It was after Roe v. Wade was overturned. So, we wanted to do it in July before others were able to kind of jump on the scene and laws were already passed, because we know there were so many questions out there. I'm sure some of you still have a lot of questions, but hopefully we've been able to answer at least some questions. And you can see, again, this rock star panel. We will send you the recording. We will, try and get as much information out to you as possible, and, come back to the Secure the Village website, because we will continually update it. Stan, I know you're on the phone. Our next event that we already have scheduled in November is, I forgot the date.
Yeah, that's November 2nd. We're going to do a reprise of this one, of this. We also have an event coming up in September on election security that people may be interested in. And that's part of our whole mission, is to help bring this information out to ordinary people that don't normally live in it. And as you said, a rock star panel, Tim and Mark and Kelley and you, Alexa. Thank you all. Thanks as well to, you're looking at, this was not just Secure the Village, but the Harvard W3D, and Alexa, you're a part of that organization called the Innovation for the Benefit of Humanity, also helping us, and Axel Cloth and Chris Clausen and those people. And then the privacy law section of the California Lawyers Association, also helping pull this thing together. So it's another illustration that it's really the village. It's all of us. We all have a piece of what this is about. No one of us has all the answers to it. That's clear from the Q&A section. If you just look through the questions and answers, a lot of this stuff is going to work itself out over the next few years. And to just repeat what all of you said, the importance of everybody kind of paying attention to this stuff. And we're here, Secure the Village is here to help you do that. But ultimately, each and every one of us has that personal responsibility to figure out. The first question was, well, what do you mean by privacy? And hopefully by now you see that's really a complicated question. You would think, gee, that it's A, B, C, D, and E. Well, not quite. So it's an ongoing dialogue. It's an ongoing conversation. And in its own way, that's what Secure the Village is all about. So for those of you who are interested, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out on information security and privacy. You can sign up for that at our website. We'll keep you in the loop for other events that we have. And again, Alexa, Tim, Mark, Kelley, thank you all for really a wonderful webinar. Back to you, Alexa, to just kind of wrap it up.
Thank you, everyone. Again, get in touch. We were delighted to have you here. We have had a massive number of attendees on this call, and we will be sending out the recording. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, the planning committee and our sponsors. And thank you, audience.